Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Inshallah, we'll continue our chapter 2 study. So far, as you recall, we have defined what ecology is, which is basically a study of living things in the environment and how they interact with their other living things. We talked about what a biosphere and what that means in biotic and abiotic factors in the environment. We looked at how ecologists study living things at a different level. Now we're going to talk about how organisms obtain energy in their ecosystems. This is one of the basic ideas of ecology. In other words, every living thing has to eat to survive, and what are their strategies towards obtaining that energy, which is a term you can substitute for food in a way. So types of ecosystems, before we talk about how they obtain energy, but just look at the different types of ecosystems that exist. Environments can be divided broadly into two different categories. Terrestrial ecosystems, if you recall, ecosystems are communities with the abiotic factors. They can be classified as terrestrial, meaning land ecosystems, and aquatic, meaning water-based ecosystem. A fish tank is the aquatic ecosystem, for example. So among aquatic, they are not universally the same. They're like different types of even aquatic. Not all aquatic ecosystems are the same. A lake is different from a marsh, it's different from an ocean. So those are examples of aquatic ecosystems. In general, you can even define ecosystems as natural and artificial. For example, a fish tank is an example of an artificial ecosystem. If you think about it, it has biotic and abiotic factors in the definition of an ecosystem. And a car, which has rust on one side, a little miniature ecosystem in itself, so to speak. So they're natural ecosystem and they're artificial ecosystem. But in general, you can divide ecosystems otherwise into terrestrial and aquatic. And among aquatic, freshwater ecosystems and marine, which is another name for saltwater ecosystems, right? And there are different types of freshwater and saltwater. But the big picture is, in general, you can divide ecosystems in environments into terrestrials and aquatic. Now, going back to the organism level, how do they obtain their energy in these particular different type of ecosystem? And you can imagine it would be different and broadly in which type of ecosystems they live. But in general, these are common things to all living things. So we have some terms. For example, a habitat. What does the term habitat mean? This is a common term you probably heard. In habitat means place where an organism lives out its life. It's like Chicago. That's where we live. If you live in Chicago, that's like a person's habitat. If somebody lives in in Dallas, that's their habitat. That's the environment that they live their life out. For a frog may be born in a pond, grows up in a pond, gets married in a pond, and dies in the pond. Same pond. And that's the habitat of that frog. Okay? In a habitat of an organism, right? That organism has to find basically food, water, and shelter, right? So food, water, shelter, and a living space is what that organism has to do in order to survive. So look at the different types of habitats. There's a forest habitat, that's where the organism lives out its life. The ocean habitat, that's where certain organisms are there have. And there's underground habitat, a worm, right? A worm in its lifetime, I don't know, it might never go beyond 50 feet from where it was born, as far as yeah? So in desert habitat, these are all places where organisms call their home and live out their story of their lives. Habitats can change, okay? And the force that change can be brought upon the organism by external forces. It can even disappear. For example, before all these homes were created, all those trees had to be removed. They all had to be cut down, right? And what happened to all the deer that used to live in that area, right? So the habitat was taken away, right? So habitats can change or even disappear, right? And new habitats can emerge, correct? So organisms a habitat may be, the guy from Dallas might move to Chicago, or somebody from Chicago may move to Boston or something like that, so their habitat might change. Now, niche is an interesting term, okay? So habitat is like where organism lives. A niche is how a species specifically fulfill its needs in a habitat. Okay, for example, you can say broadly, I live in Chicago, right? But what's my niche? How do I fulfill my life's niches? Okay, I'm a doctor. That's my role. That's how I fulfill my life's necessities, so to speak, right? So how a species makes it living, that's called the niche. What does it do in that environment to fulfill its needs, right? So how a species specifically fulfill its needs, that's called a niche in its habitat. Okay. Now you might be surprised if you see different types of birds like this here in a pond. You might be thinking they're all competing with each other, or they're like cursing each other behind each other's back or something like that. They're competing, angry with each other. Not so, not necessarily so, because in a particular habitat, different living things occupy a different niche. Okay, for example, the flamingos, they feed by straining mud through their bills. They go dig deep down. Okay, these ducks feed on plants, which have the flamingos they don't really care about. These other birds, they feed on insects. This last one, they prey on shells, and this plovers, they hunt on small insects. In the same vicinity, they're actually looking for very different things. Okay, so not if you look at an environment, it's not that every organism is like fighting every other. In fact, most organisms in the environment are not competing with other organisms. Non-competition is more common than competition is. Does that make sense? So it is, of course, advantageous for species to occupy different niches, different roles in the same habitat, which reduces competition and increases the chances of survival for that given species, right? So remember, what we're talking about, how species get their energy needs filled, right? One is a concept is that every species that lives in a certain habitat has a different niche. Okay, that's important in understanding how they obtain their food and their energy source. The second aspect is some species do interact with other species in a positive and in a negative way. Okay, so these are survival relationships. One is a predatory relationship, in that species that hunt other prey. So there's a predator and prey relationship, right? A lion hunts a deer, for example. Predator and prey relationship. Now, a deer is not going to go knock at the lion's door. Hello, sir. You want to fill out a survey? I said, no, thank you. Come in. You take care of your survey and more. So there is competition. There are predator and prey relationships. But as I said, not all organisms compete. In fact, most organisms do not compete with each other in a particular environment. There's predator and prey relationship, and then there's another relationship called symbiosis. Okay, these are close and permanent relationships between two different species. These are permanent relationships, close, and it's like right hand, left hand. They're related. You can't think about one without the other, so to speak, right? So these are relationships that are common between organisms. Okay, and there you can divide them like in generally three different types: mutualism, okay, commensalism, parasitism, and other isms. Okay. So these are three basic types of relationship between, if they exist. Now look at these are so symbiosis is a big term that contains other small terms. So symbiosis is a close and permanent relationship between two different species, like ants and trees, for example. Here's a example of mutualism. Mutualism is where a relationship where both species benefit from their own relationship. Okay. For example, here's ants and the acacia tree, okay, in the subtropical regions of Africa. See, ants are important because they attack any animals trying to eat the leaves from the tree, see? So if a giraffe comes in there with trying to eat the leaves, he sees ants, and he doesn't like ants, so he doesn't eat the leaves. So the trees say, oh, come on in, little ants, we come make a colony right on top of you. You don't bother me, right? So the ants benefit the trees. And the tree provides nectar and home for the ants. It fulfills the needs of the ant by providing nectar as a food and home. So both organisms benefit from each other, right? So they've done experiments apparently where they removed ants from these trees, and the trees, their growth was stunted and their survival of the trees was decreased. Okay, and this is the reason why you can see a lone tree, because it survived all those animals, because probably had ants and stuff over there that protected that tree. There was another tree over here, and perhaps it didn't survive because when it was youngling there were no ants there, and somebody ate that tree up. Interesting, huh? Because the rats and stuff, they can eat those, okay? So this is an example of a symbiosis relationship between two organisms that benefits each other, and that's called mutualism. There's a second type of relationship that's called commensalism. This is a symbiotic relationship where one species benefits and the other species is just neither harmed or benefited. It's just kind of like being charitable, right? Okay, all right. So the Spanish moss, this moss that you see hanging from the tree, makes them look prettier, right? In our eyes, at least. Okay, it's happy over there. It's not harming the other tree. We just kind of hanging out there. Why is it hanging? Because it's sunbathing. Okay, but to do photosynthesis, you need sunlight. So look at this. It's going out like sunbathing, right? It's getting all the sun, and it's not hurting the tree. The tree is still fine. It gets plenty of sun, right? So one is benefiting, but the other one is not harmed. That's called commensalism. Okay? So mutualism, where they both benefit. Commensalism is one benefits, the other one is not harmed either way. Okay. Then there's third type. Not nice. Third type is parasitism. Okay. This is a relationship with one species benefits and the other one is harmed. For example, mosquito biting humans is a big nuisance, all right, because they also carry malaria and the malaria, right? They can harm the human being. Mosquito is happy, it's drinking all the, blood, and it's like growing big and chubby, right? Having grandkids and stuff. But the humans are harmed. Same way, dogs and ticks. What's the dog getting from the ticks except for a scratch, yeah? So that's another example of parasitism. Another example that the book gives is this brown-headed cowbird. These are pretty interesting, weird birds. So these birds apparently lay egg in other species' nest. It's like the birds are gone. It goes in their legs as eggs. Like, okay, hello, this one looks different, right? And then the other bird that comes by is like colorblind. It doesn't even see who it is. Just puts, kind of incubates all the eggs there. This is called brood parasitism. Brood is like, litter, like, a bunch of brood. This is parasitism. It's like taking advantage. It's doing all the work. It's mom and dad, this is a brown-headed cow, but they're going to moves or something like that. And everybody's doing their work. Yeah? This is another example of. So this is very interesting because you see, this is what ecology study. They study interaction between organisms and living things. Okay. So we talked about how living things get their energy. Now, in the broader sense, you can see that they're not all competing with other organisms, but there are predator and prey relationships, right? And there are symbiotic relationships. Okay. Now, specifically, how do they obtain energy from bottom up, so to speak? Well, plants are producers. So there are certain living things called autotrophs. Auto meaning self. Okay, they generate their own energy. Okay, so producers are living things that make their own energy. These are plants and other organisms that are able to do photosynthesis. Okay, organisms that use light energy from the sun. Okay, and they combine it with other molecules in the environment to make food for themselves. So they're called producers or autotrophs. Plants are examples of this, right? So producers. So plants use energy from the sun and they make their own food by photosynthesis. Here's an example of photosynthesis. A plant taking light, carbon dioxide, and water, giving carbohydrates, sugars, and oxygen, right? Okay. So plants use some of their energy to do their day-to-day job, and then they store some of their energy, like in the fridge, like potatoes. Potato that we eat is like stored energy from all the work the plant has done, right? Potatoes stored. Green algae, for example, okay, they're unicellular organisms. They're not plants, but they make their own energy. Okay, so plants and grasses, they're not the only ones that are able to do photosynthesis. By far, they're very important, of course, but there are other living things that can do that. Everybody else are consumers. They depend on the autotrophs, the producers, for their energy, like us. Yeah, we don't have leaves, right? We don't do photosynthesis, correct? Okay. So we are consumers or heterotrophs. Organisms incapable of making their own food. These are called heterotrophs. Now, heterotrophs are like herbivores, H-E-R-B-I, herbivores. They are like vegetarians. They're like, we don't eat meat. No, we're like nice. Like that. They're like herbivores. They only eat plants. Carnivores are like meat eaters. And omnivores is a term, but an animal that is meat eater or a plant eater. Like humans, they have meat eaters and plant eaters. They're omnivores. Okay. And they're scavengers. Scavengers, they don't kill, okay? They wait for animals to die or somebody else to kill the animal, and then they go and eat the animal. Yeah? They get a bad rap. But they're actually very important because if nobody did the work of the scavengers, we'd have dead animals everywhere. That would not be very good. So scavengers are actually very important in ecological systems. So these are different types of consumers or heterotrophs. Okay? They all depend on the producers, ultimately. Pizza with everything. That's an omnivore. So that's it. As scavengers, they feed on dead animals. They're like the cleanup crew of the environment, right? And there are different types of scavengers. See, there are beetles and this and that. They eat on dead stuff, right? And look at this, okay? And if who's going to eat the fox besides the decomposers, right? Otherwise, we have dead fox right in our backyard or something like that. So these are very important. Now, decomposers are very important. See, these are the scavengers eating dead food. Decomposers are different, okay? And they're different decomposers for different stages of decomposing. You understand? So going from here to here, there are different stages of decomposing, and there are different organisms that feed at different stages of decomposition. Yeah? That's quite amazing. It's like, okay, first cleanup crew, second cleanup crew, third cleanup crew, fourth cleanup crew, and after a while, there's nothing left except for bones. Yeah? So it's like, and fungi are actually also very important decomposers. Okay. Energy flow. Okay, this is the last part of this, and after this, inshallah, we'll take another break. Okay. Energy flow. These are called trophic levels. Okay. So we know producers, they make their own food. Consumers, we love to consume stuff that's made by producers, like this kid, God loving that, whatever. So, a flow of energy in ecosystem. Who eats who? Say, sun, producers. Producers are consumed by consumers. When consumers die, they're taken care of by decomposers. The decomposers take the stuff and they turn everything into inorganic nutrient material that's used by producers again. At each stage, some of the process releases heat into the environment, right? A food chain is basically like who eats who model. A simple model of that shows how matter and energy move in an ecosystem. Okay, for example, here's a producer. The insect is herbivore. It's going to eat on this plant. And the mouse eats the insect. And the owl eats the mouse. So this is called a food chain. It's like who eats who. Who's the boss, right? Okay. That's called a food chain. It shows you how energy flows in an ecosystem, right? Okay. Now, at each level of the food chain is called a trophic level. See? Trophic level. This level, this level, this. That's called a trophic level. Okay? Now, in an ecosystem, you can see these food chains interact with each other, right? And all of the food chains put together in an ecosystem, that's called a food web. Okay, for example, they all feed on the plants. The mice, however, can be eaten by owl and hawks. Mice can be eaten by foxes. And insects here, this insect can be eaten by this bird and this bird by this snake. Or this insect can be eaten directly by a snake. So all the different combinations of the food chains make up the food web. Okay? Food chain, food web, pretty intuitive, right? Everything is connected, as we suggested before. These are called trophic levels. Okay, the first trophic level, producers. Second trophic level, grasshoppers, frogs, snakes. Fourth, fifth, trophic at each trophic level. Yeah, this is very interesting. Though you wonder why is there It's like a triangle pyramid type thing, right? Okay, first of all, you have to understand there cannot ever be more insects than grass, because all insects depend on the grass for their energy. How can they be more insect? Then there'll be like no grass left, right? And secondly, there has to be more grasshoppers than frogs, because if there are more frogs than grasshoppers, then that's like the end of ecosystem, right? So that means at every trophic level, there are fewer number of organisms, and also therefore, which means there are fewer collected energy, because a living thing is nothing more than collected energy, right? Okay. So this is called an energy level, an energy pyramid. And a living thing is just basically energy collected over from the trophic level that's below. And this is an interesting fact. Each level only has about 10% of the energy from below. In other words, only about 10% of the grass is eaten and turned into energy, so to speak. And then 10%, 10%, 10%. Okay? So most of it is not used up like that. At the highest trophic level, you'll find the fewest number of organisms. Okay? Now look at this. For every 1,000 green plants, there are 50 snails. For every 50 snails, there are 20 blackbirds that feed on them. For every 20 blackbirds, there's one hawk. You see that? The number of organisms decreases with each trophic level. It has to be that way for the system to survive. And this is called the biomass. Biomass is a term of the total mass of the living thing at a particular trophic level. Okay, so we talked about ecology, we talked about biosphere, etc. We talked about ecology and how we study different levels, and we talked about how organisms obtain their energy in an ecosystem. The last topic we have to talk about before we finish this chapter, inshallah, is cycles in nature, and we shall do that next time. Until then, as-salatu was-salamu ala rasulillah, assalamu alaikum.